All right, good afternoon. Hello, I'm Curtis Rodgers, Principal at Brick and Mortar Ventures, and I'll be bringing y'all a presentation today on smart buildings and infrastructure. Go to the next slide, please. Yep, so I work for Brick and Mortar Ventures, and we're a venture capital firm based in San Francisco. It was started by Darren Bechtel, the Bechtel construction family, and we have the mission of being the premier design and construction and maintenance investor. So really we got started because we believed that construction was suffering from solution scarcity, and recently with mobile devices, 4G, all these technologies made it possible for construction to really achieve breakthroughs in productivity through technology. So that was really our thesis of the fund. And we're a global firm, and yep, go to the next slide. This is our team. So if you're not familiar with Bechtel, that is, well, I think last year Turner beat them, but they're about $30 billion a year in construction, and Darren is the CEO's brother, so he's like sixth generation Bechtel. And then he decided that he wanted to be an angel investor and then a venture capitalist, and I was his first hire. So my background, I graduated from TXST Business School in 2006, and then graduated in the master's program in 2009, and got into construction working at Keynote Construction. So started as an engineer building power plants and infrastructure, and then after a year of rotating through various positions, I was put in a role dedicated to new technology and process improvement, and grew my scope of responsibility at Keynote to work in defense, mining, oil and gas, pretty much all of the heavy industrial markets. And then went to work for a company called PlanGrid, which was a startup in Silicon Valley. They sold for about $800 million to Autodesk. And then I went to work for McCarthy Construction. They're the largest healthcare builder in North America. And I was there for 2 years, again, led new technology, process improvement. And while I was at McCarthy, I started the Society for Construction Solutions. So that is a nonprofit to support construction entrepreneurs, and that's how I met Darren Bechtel. So Darren and I met about 6.5 years ago, and actually pitched him an idea, and he interrupted me and offered me a job. So that's how I started with Darren. And I worked with Darren for 2.5 years, just investing his capital. We managed about $30 million, and then we raised a $100 million fund. And then Darren hired the rest of the team members. So Costa Pandya, he also worked for Keynote Construction as an engineer. He's got degrees, many degrees, Berkeley, Stanford, MIT. He's a genius. He was a forensic structural engineer, and he also was the head of McKinsey's construction consulting business. And then Austin Yunt, he's a wonderful guy, former baseball player, investment banker. His family is a major developer in the Phoenix area and is working with Bill Gates on a project. They call it City of the Future. It's a large development project. And then Alice Leung, she's a good friend of mine. She was an engineer at DPR Construction, set up their office in Singapore, and she has a background in electrical engineering from Brown. But that's our team, and what we do is invest in emerging technology for construction. And the next slide. But we get our capital, that $100 million fund was raised from these corporations. And so we work with these corporations on their strategic objectives. And one that's very relevant to this presentation today is Sidewalk Labs. So that's an Alphabet company or associated with Google. And they did a City of the Future in Toronto that didn't work out too well. They've got an infrastructure fund that's going quite well. So we invest in early stage companies, pre-revenue, very, very early. We do spin-outs from national labs and, defense spin-outs, things like that. But we also work with, large corporations, large organizations on their objectives like cities of the future, smart infrastructure, things like that. Great, next slide. So this is how we view the world. This is really our investment thesis. And we say that construction is not an industry. Construction is a common process among many industries. And we put that on a spectrum from simple to complex. So this is how we make our investments, where on the simple side of construction, we think that those markets can actually be disrupted. So, single family homes, multifamily, light commercial. But then once you get into the more, complex infrastructure, power generation, things like that, we're not so so convinced that there's going to be true disruption, but there's going to be companies that are solving problems that are common across multiple markets. So this is really how we invest. We've got modular residential home companies where you can build them very efficiently in a factory and then just plop them down on site. And then we've got 3D printed building facades and all kinds of cool stuff. And then on this side, we have reality capture investments. We have a quality control startup that we spun out of Shell. But that's kind of how we view the world. And I think it's also relevant to thinking about the future of smart buildings, things like that. All right, next slide, please. Cool. So the three kind of key concepts that I'm going to go through today are technology is enabling new models, new business models really for building owners and occupants. So it would be one thing just to kind of talk about IoT and smart devices and things like that. What I'm going to do is talk to you about how business models can be enabled with these technologies and how that changes the relationship between the developer and the occupants and all of that. And then new solutions are needed to meet the needs for connectivity. So that's really like power, utilities. Whenever there's a major power outage, Google Fiber wasn't able to deliver high-speed internet, and why did they fail? That type of thing. And then the cost of infrastructure maintenance. So this is an area that I think we're qualified to talk about when it comes to the future of infrastructure. How is it going to change? What can you do to anticipate it? Next slide, please. So the first company I want to bring to your attention is a company called Stay. I was very fortunate to go to Beijing. We were hosted by Glodon, one of our investors. They're kind of like the Autodesk of China. And they started out making estimating software in China. Now they're a major corporation. I think they have about 80% market share, which is kind of bonkers. But we got to meet all of these wonderful entrepreneurs in China. And this company, Stay, was really a Swedish entrepreneur who was the most successful developer in China, doing mega projects with really like the Swedish pension fund money. And what Stay does is uses smart building technology to create a disruptive business model. And it's kind of like if Airbnb built their own buildings. It's kind of that concept. Next slide, please. So this is the entrance of Stay, and it looks kind of like a high-end hotel. Next slide. And what they have done is they've created it's a whole bunch of solutions. You've got a social network, so anybody who visits the hotel or uses the bar or goes to the dance club or the gym, they can join the building through this mobile app. And then you can buy a condo in the building and then hit a button on the app, and then they'll wheel in this little cart, and then all your smart locks and all of the components of your condo will change. It'll become a hotel room. So next slide. So this is apartment mode. So right now, everything is unlocked. And next slide. And this is hotel mode. So you can see that there's actually the bed hinges, and you can't see, but the cabinets have locked. And so they're using the smart, IoT connected, components to make this space convertible from a apartment to a hotel room. And that's kind of built into the building and the business model. So you can buy a condo there, you can rent a space for weeks at a time, and then at the kind of first and second floor is your like traditional hospitality, restaurant, nightclub, things like that. But we thought this was a really interesting concept. We've never seen it anywhere else, but I thought this would be a bit more interesting than just talking about all the smart devices. But smart devices used with an innovative business model, we see it as very disruptive, and they're expanding. COVID's not helping them, but they're doing quite well in China. Yep, next slide. Cool. So now getting into more of the infrastructure stuff, which I think is going to be kind of a bigger deal. This is a company I want to go back one. I want to bring your attention to Traxel. So Traxel was founded by a gentleman, two gentlemen. One of them spent 10 years at the CIA doing telecommunications. And then the other gentleman, he spent 10 years at Johnson Controls. And they teamed up to create a solution for low-cost utility installation, and it's funded by the National Science Foundation and the Department of Defense. So next slide. So if you're aware, Google Fiber, Austin was one of the Google Fiber cities. Google Fiber pulled the plug. It's no longer happening, and this is probably a Bechtel crew. And what they're doing is you had someone come through and saw cut, and so that's a micro trench, and now they're running the fiber down the road. And it was just too expensive. They're hitting utilities left and right. The cost of construction was too high, and Google just gave up. It's not possible. So what Traxel has developed, next slide, is, it's kind of hard to see, but what's going on is this is like a riding lawnmower that leaves behind a totally protected utility. That can be fiber optic, that can be a micro gas line, that can be anything you want. Next slide. Yep, so you can see that it's a UV cured resin, and it's very similar to the material you would have to repair your teeth. And it's a very efficient process. Right now, they're being used to install perimeter. Well, there's things that they're doing with the Air Force that's really interesting that I probably shouldn't talk about publicly, but it's not classified. But you can hide this. That can all be changed. You can change the color of the material to match the substrate. So it's a very efficient way to install utilities. Think last mile connectivity. All the Starlink downlinks, you're going to need to run those connections, out, and putting this on an impermeable surface like a parking lot or a highway, something like that. It's a very efficient way to install utilities. Next slide. And so there's two coatings. There's the first pass, which is the utility put into a resin, and that is really to affix it to the surface. And then there's another pass that coats it, and that's the real protection. And they've been running over it with the largest bomber in the Air Force's fleet time and time again, and it has not delaminated. So it's amazingly strong and resilient, and there's no trenching. It's a trenchless utility installation, which this is an early stage company, just like these machines that I showed you are prototypes almost ready for production. But they're doing pilots. That first photo I showed you was actually in Houston. Next slide. So the last one that I wanted to address was infrastructure maintenance. And you may be aware of all the poor quality of the infrastructure in America. And as the funding is being put in place for the infrastructure overhaul, the Army Corps of Engineers is very aware of corrosion of rebar and corrosion of just steel being used in infrastructure construction. And so we happen to know quite a bit about composites for reinforcements and things like that because we co-hosted the NASA 3D Printed Habitat Challenge and got to learn about basalt and what laboratories were really working with basalt. And so basalt is a naturally occurring mineral. It's basically volcanic rock, and that's what we're going to use to build on the moon and Mars. Well, now there's a lot more funding going into basalt and other composite rebar and other composite infrastructure building products. And this is something I wanted to share with y'all, put on your radar, because we think that there's going to be quite a significant change in operations and also maintenance budgeting and things like that. So the problems with composite rebar is you can't bend it on site, but now there's some really innovative new things coming out of the labs where potentially be able to bend it, but you can't count on those always working. So you're going to have to change the construction operations, do a lot more prefab in order to use these composite reinforcements, but then also you're going to have to budget differently, and yeah. It's quite possible that there'll just be a mandate of no more steel rebar and we're going to composites, and that's going to be very disruptive. And as far as we understand, it's really the Army Corps of Engineers just not wanting to have to deal with corroding infrastructure 50 years down the road, because now we're in this horrible situation. Okay, next slide. So you got the bridge inspection, next slide. and then you've got steel pipes. So these are the two areas I want to show you kind of what's going on in composites. Next slide. This is a company called Long Pipes. This is out in Western Australia. And this entrepreneur, he has a background in composites for the aerospace industry. And he was developing some composites for deforming control surfaces, and then thought that, hey, this could be useful in rapidly deployable pipes. So what this is a machine that kind of lays out something like a fireman's hose, and then there's a resin that's injected into the pipe, and then that cures. So it's a composite pipe. You would oftentimes see things similar to this, just as pipe liners on steel pipes. But this would be the first time where you can actually just completely eliminate the steel in the process, and now you've got a very, very strong composite pipe. So this is being used in mines, and they're now much farther along than they were. They were kind of stuck for a while, but now their customers are kind of getting it. But there's two different ways you can install it. You can lay out the entire run, and that's very expeditionary, very fast, or you can just have these as prefabricated lengths, and dramatically reduces your construction cost because of the weight. It's just total order of magnitude lighter than a steel pipe. Yep. Next slide. And then this is the composite rebar. There's many different types of composite rebar, and rebar is really boring, so I'm not going to get into too much on that. But yeah, that's really all I need to know, that there's composite rebar. Next slide. Okay, so those are the 3 points that I wanted to cover. You know, all the IoT and all that technology and the data coming off of it is all interesting, but you have to make a significant change in your business model to really unlock the value. Otherwise, you know, you're just going to avoid, you know, you're going to get early notifications for leaks and stuff like that. It's not really that interesting. But as far as what we're looking for is where is their new business models being created, and we think Stay is really interesting for that. And then the new solutions for power and connectivity. Traxel is just now hitting the scene, and there's a lot of opportunities to get involved with them and start installing utilities in a completely new way. So Google Fiber gave up. We don't know if Google Fiber is going to come back and use this new technology, but there's already customers using it, but no one yet has committed to doing an ambitious campaign like Google Fiber. But we think that it's absolutely much more feasible than it was previously. Yep. And then, yeah, anybody doing precast concrete or you know, pipe, you know, operations, I'd love to talk to you. We're investing heavily in technologies to make it possible to use composites and rebar and pipe, but it does require a lot of change to your organization. All right, well, thank you. Oh, any questions? Yep.
Thank you so much, Kurt. That was wonderful. Oh, here we go. Of course he does.
On your investment portfolio criteria, you do all of the above? Angel, seed, A, B, C, mezzanine, all of it? Or?
Yeah, so we typically do $500,000 checks, probably up to $10 million checks. Yep, so our largest to date is closer to 10, and then going forward, we'll probably do smaller checks as well, but that's, you know, we'd say seed through B is our sweet spot, and we're not afraid of, you know, spin outs from, you know, national research labs and things like that, the really early stuff. Any other questions?
It seems like one of the sectors that you're looking at is space, so and there's a lot going on with, you know, cosmic shielding or how to build on Mars. I mean, I'm talking about that because SpaceX has this Alpha site in Brownsville, and then there's a lot of companies that are very interested in moving there, and a lot of them are very innovative. And so I don't know if you'd be interested in those companies and what they do, but it is cutting edge.
Absolutely. You know, I have an NDA in place with SpaceX, but I can't say more than that. But I can talk about what else is going on in space construction if you want to talk about that afterwards. Sure. But yeah, it's exciting.